You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a podcast that centers with the hopes of uplifting, informing, and bringing together disabled people and their allies. If you'd like to join Dana in the conversation, head to the description to check out our link tree and find us on Instagram at DANA at Sac State. Hashtag Where's the Ramp? Hashtag We're Good at Podcasting. Hello, everybody who's here and everybody who's watching later. Guess who's back? Back again. I am back, and that's your problem now. We're doing a podcast today. We're talking about a topic that I'll talk about shortly. For now, however, I'll just say that we have myself in the room, and we have our illustrious other people. We got William the First, and our once and future club officer, probably, maybe, I don't know, Brian Thao with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if we usually do introductions by name. Sometimes we do.
Anyway. Yeah, we do.
It's good stuff. It's part of the social expectations on a podcast, which is what we're talking about today. Not podcast, social expectations. Basically, the idea from and this was my topic, and a peek behind the curtain, it got moved up. So I'm a little bit floundering here. But the base idea is that we as people and as everybody live under such material conditions as eventually culturally sort of impose expectations on us, right? And for disabled people specifically, it's hard sometimes to meet those expectations because they're arbitrary and unattainable, and the whole point of them is to make you feel worse about yourself, essentially. And that is what we want to sort of dive into and dissect here today. Credit, by the way, to another much more popular, much better YouTuber called FD Signifier for kind of giving me this idea. I don't know if it's appropriate to link his stuff in the description, but we can certainly try, because specifically he was talking about the online manosphere and brought in the idea of hegemonic ideal masculinity, which prompted this thought on my end to cover it here, I guess, and to say a thing about it, especially as it relates to disability. Outline for this session, I guess it's going to be chaotic as ever, but I'm going to try to run through some of the theory, some of the base of knowledge that we can build on top of, that we can relate personal experiences to, and then we will go and do those personal experiences and see if we can't figure out some way of like doing something about it. And when I say doing something about it, I haven't fully described the problem, and I don't know if I'm capable of fully describing the problem. So we may or may not get there. But yeah, okay. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. I'm going to launch into a rambly explanation about hegemonic ideals, and we're going to endure with me on that.
Yeah, it's just really abstract like ideas, but it should make sense.
We are all familiar, I think, with cultural norms. There are certain expectations, certain ways of being that we take to be right, good, obvious, etc. Standards, essentially, to which we hold ourselves and others. And that's different social expectations for different time periods, different places, different cultures, even different like social strata, social intersections. For example, being of a different gender gives you a different set of social expectations, different set of norms and ideals. And some key insights here are that those cultural expectations arise out of material conditions. In our case, the material conditions is essentially market capitalism with a bit of government regulation thrown in for flavor. Those conditions are naturally dominating. They're oppressive and privileging to various groups of people based on usefulness, essentially, to capital, or control over capital. Usefulness and control being slightly different things. In other words, the insight from like historical materialism is that we don't get cultural expectations from a vacuum. They arise out of material conditions, and those material conditions are those of hegemony or domination. So you get hegemonic ideals that privilege some and oppress others. This is part of how the system, the hegemony, the in our case capitalist system, but it hasn't always been capitalist. It's just a different hegemony in different time periods. perpetuates itself by setting up cultural expectations in order that the people at various strata, at various intersections, might be maximally useful, or at least rendered non-threatening to that structure of domination. So, for an example, basically, one of the insights from hegemonic masculine ideals is that men are supposed to be like physically strong, and we can kind of see where this comes from, right? A lot of people will connect it to like ancient tribal dynamics. I'm not sure that's the case. Men are supposed to be strong, I think, because they're supposed to be physical laborers, or at least at many times in periods of history, many times in places, men have been the laborers, the physical laborers and farmers of first resort, as well as the warriors of first resort. Being useful to the leadership or to capital at those times and places has given rise to this idea that men are supposed to be, farmers and warriors, etc. And by extension, supposed to be physically strong and capable and stuff. If then you meet those standards, you kind of are especially physically strong and capable, you feel the expectation to act on that. You feel the expectation to go and do labor for somebody, to generate surplus labor value for a corporation somewhere by way of physical labor. So maybe you go and work on roads and stuff. But if you don't, you're also still useful to the system by having adopted the idea intuitively. If you don't meet those physical standards or can't ever meet those physical standards or whatever, you're either encouraged to try, by which you wind up paying for the privilege of trying, to a gym or whatever sham dietary supplement is most popular this week, or you wind up simply just feeling bad about yourself, just feeling a little bit worse because for whatever reason you can't meet those physical standards. All the same, you wind up useful to the structure of power, because if you feel worse about yourself by being unable to meet those physical standards, you are less likely to try and do something about the structure of power. Something similar, I think, holds for disabled people, where the entire set of cultural expectations, of hegemonic norms, is designed to make us worse, essentially, at collectivizing. By disabled, we usually mean unable to work or unable to generate enough surplus labor value, because it takes more investment to get our labor out of us than able-bodied people. That's kind of what we mean by able-bodied people as well. It's a relation to the market such that, generally speaking, disabled people are reliably worse at generating surplus labor value. Again, for corporations, we leave it aside for now whether or not generating surplus labor value is ever a worthy thing to do. But because we are conventionally worse at it, and because that means that the structure of domination, the structure of material orders, can't get from us that surplus labor value, it can't perpetuate itself that way, the norms arise by which we fail to be up to standard, because that means that we become worse at collectivizing, worse at demanding stuff from the government, more jaded with the system, and so on and so forth. That's the basic idea, and I'm happy to clarify. I'm happy to speak on any other time and place on this kind of thing, but I wanted to run through the theory as quickly as I could, because this is the kind of thing that, again, I take it the key insight is how this props up a structure, how this perpetuates a system of oppression and privilege and material distribution in the society. But it does this by way of each individual person having a significant experience with it. So being subject to cultural and hegemonic norms, and being unable to meet them, and having the sort of cognitive, emotional, and social interpersonal fallout from that impact your life to make you worse off. So I wondered if we could get and garner some of the personal experiences of those in the room, and in order to sort of get people thinking at home, and get people becoming more conscious of this idea and stuff.
Yeah, I really
Yeah,
like how you made like an example of the men and like women, how like men historically are so supposed to be the strong ones, the laborers, the workers, the farmers, the warriors, and because they're like useful to like leadership or like capitalism, historic capitalism, and the reason why like they are supposed to be like strong is because of a cultural expectation that like everyone like wants them to be strong, but how like it is like for disabled people, like we can't be, some who has a physical disability can't meet those standards, and that's like a really good like I guess comparison.
yeah. Of course, it's just one example, but yeah,
I want to put it in an example, like in the Asian country. That's how we are. Like a lot of men go to work and the women stay home just to take care of the children. But after we get in the wheelchair, the table, anything we do is not, it's our expectation, and a lot of people didn't like it.
Yeah, that's the, I think, yeah, I think that is exactly that, because of the culture expectation that women should stay at home, that disabled people should like stay inside, that they should because of these cultural expectations that society like put on us.
it's interesting, like how deep into the culture this kind of thing is embedded is really tough to, for me personally, to like reconcile with, because for example, I have like a personal praxis where that really fun that really emphasizes functionality. Like everything you see behind me, that's the most decorative thing. That's the most decorative set of things that I have in my entire life, essentially. And most of them are literally textbooks. Uh, to what extent then am I just trying to be Batman? Am I just trying to meet that like that hegemonic expectation of white cis dude um, who is 24 or something? And to what extent am I being sincere in the kinds of things that I like and the kinds of things that I own and stuff? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. Maybe it has to do with something that like there just isn't a sincere self removed from the culture, or maybe there is, or we can achieve something like it by sort of deconstructing that culture, et cetera, et cetera. But absolutely, there's a lot of like expectations that sort of prompt action as well as like self-image and whatnot, or
Yeah,
like prompt action by way of self-image.
yeah, I think I guess like, do you think that cultural expectations can change like as we, I guess like as time goes on? I think it can.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in
Yeah,
the insight from like
absolutely.
historical materialism is that there's like material basis for that change most of the time. So like as technology gets more advanced, like as smartphones become more, I don't know, popular, they've not only become like luxuries that are now necessities by way of our building around them, but they were also almost immediately status symbols. If you had a smartphone, you had money, and you had the means to not only have a smartphone, but probably have the latest smartphone because there was one.
Yeah.
Again, a material basis. And so as the materials change, as the technology advances, or whatever that means, as technology changes, as materials are allocated differently, yeah, they change for different times and locations. Um, and of course, there's kind of a lag, isn't there?
Yeah.
As we
Exactly.
start to change technology, we don't abandon the old norms. Like you don't have to be physically strong much anymore in like day-to-day life in society. It comes in handy sometimes, but for the most part, it's not really deeply embedded into your lifestyle, but it's still deeply embedded into like literally my
Yeah.
self-image being physically strong. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Like I guess like before, like most of the work was like farming. Like before, like all these like capitalisms, just like farming, taking care of, I guess, you had like your life with plants and stuff. But now, like you don't have to be strong to make money. You don't have to be strong to like physically strong to kind of like live your own life. You can just like live it without worrying about, am I strong enough to do this? Do I have enough time to farm? Do I have enough time to, I guess, like, yeah.
yeah, Yeah, we switched to a different modality of not only like ordinary lifestyle stuff, but also of like burning ourselves in the engine of the infinite growth machine. You know, being useful to the structure of domination.
Yeah, times have
Uh,
changed.
yeah. And eventually, I expect more and more often, like our ideas about what's normal, especially for masculinity. Well, you know, not especially, but you know, including for masculinity, will change significantly with it, even more than they already have done, because we'll continue probably to shift in the direction of cognition over physical strength in the market economy. But yeah, sorry.
And I guess the political and government of a country can like make expectation that people try to follow. Maybe
Yeah, I think government
oh,
input
yeah.
is a good thing too, to kind of like put it out there. Maybe like, because I think there's some programs out there that like STEM women, like people notice that there's not a lot of STEM women, and people are trying to change that, and like, yeah, people are just trying to change that. So it's not like a men like dominating like thing. Like for engineering majors, like there's not a lot of like women in there, or like there used to be like barely any, but now it's just it just changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I've followed a little bit of the discourse in that. Like, there are, I mean, yeah, if I'm going into politics, but I have some idea about this, even though it's not my intersection, you know. There have been for many years that a sort of tradition or norm, an expectation on the part of like, I mean, actually like elementary school teachers and that far down, that women just don't go into STEM. It's just not a womanly kind of thing
Yeah.
to do. And that kind of makes sense when couched in historical materialism as well, because it was the case at the beginning of approximately the Industrial Revolution, when cognition became most important, or like when you know the engineering became really important to the market economy. It was the case that like men at that time controlled all the capital, so they you know were able to do the patents, they were able to buy the machines to build the other machines, and so on and so forth. So over time, it becomes the case in a layered and slightly like emergent and in a non-conscious fashion, that it just becomes the intuitive, common sense, obvious idea that women just don't go into STEM. It's just not their kind of thing. Likewise for like hegemony or like hegemonic ideals and women, I think the specific Supreme Court justices who did what was it, Dobbs versus like Women's Health Organization, the most recent court ruling which undid Roe v. Wade, etc., have a specific idea of what a woman is in mind when they write that policy. And they make some defense vis-a-vis the Constitution, but it doesn't matter. They can make any defense they want, and nobody can check them on it. But the reason I think that they legislate the way they do on the Supreme Court is mostly to do with like what they think a woman is, and it's a baby maker who works in the kitchen all day, or something similar to it. There's and it's all wrapped up in like in Christian ideas as well, I would say, but like more so that material history, that way in which things just emerge from material conditions to become you know, oppressive norms and perceived as obvious ones.
Yeah, I do think that the dominating culture has changed, because the dominating culture before was like, I guess like the Western men centric culture, but now it's more of a like equal footing, I think.
So yeah, so my specific thought with disability again is that like for the most part, you have a set of ideals in our culture and in all cultures, wherein the thing that it means to be disabled, which is to be less useful to like the owner class as far as like expanding their wealth for them, is itself sort of a pejorative descriptor. Like, you, for the longest time in American history, there was a resistance to even calling anyone disabled. You would rather say differently abled, or before that handicapped, etc. That's changed a little bit, but like it reflects what we think about work and what we think about jobs and stuff, and how we sort of have come to equate or closely relate like worthiness as a person with capacity to generate surplus labor value. Just that people didn't even want to be called disabled, never mind like start to deconstruct what it means to be disabled and like how the system is designed to sort of oppress them. And that's one of the ways in which it's designed to oppress them. You get them to not identify as themselves and just as occupying the position in the market that they do, then you can essentially do whatever you want to them, because they can't constitute a voting bloc, or they can't collectivize because they don't know how to, they don't have that category. That continues to today, where by way of being disabled, we are constantly and continuously pejoratized. You have like media representation of disabled people that is almost always bad. It is almost always trying to influence, or like accidentally probably influencing the hermeneutic in an oppressive direction, where disabled people are either somehow superheroes by way of their disability, or like totally infantilized.
Yeah. I guess that reminds me of I guess our conversation last week with Rian when she was talking about power soccer. Basically, it's like, whenever news stories cover a disabled person, they talk more about their disability, or how like, oh my god, they have so many of these like, I guess like barriers to kind of do this, but they can still do that, be like a superhero. I guess they don't really focus on the sport. Like,
wow, you're so brave for existing and trying to do things with your life. Exactly.
They transform these stories into like success stories instead of just a disabled person living their life with sports.
Yeah, I wish we could have had Rihanna here today, who talks all the time about that kind of thing, which as you say, you covered last week. I was not here, I was in San Diego. Very much time on a train. And how like and also Rihanna's really good at like understanding and relaying about media representation specifically, which is a lot of like where especially that young kids will get their ideas about disability and etc. But we can talk about cars as well if we want to on this exact topic, because guess what? The world's really designed for cars, and out of those material conditions arises a hegemonic ideal whereby you have to be a driver. That's it. That's all there is to the ideal. You're just supposed to be a driver. And if you literally physically can't, or if like me, you have the particular like ocular condition that makes it wildly unsafe, if not impossible, then well, you're just less a person. Like literally you can't navigate the world the same way that a driver can, but that's not all that there is to it, is there? You just can't attain the kind of like social status that people do if or are capable of if they have cars, because you're supposed to have one. That's kind of all there is to it. Like cars, intra car social dynamics are also interesting, by way of like some of them being status symbols, some of them being pejoratively described more often, like an old like hand-me-down car is better by almost every metric, except that it's uglier by our cultural standards,
I think times have changed with cars too. It's like, cars used to be like in, I don't know, like the 1900s or maybe 1800s, I don't know, but yeah, like if you had a car, you're rich. But now it's like, if you don't have a car, then what's wrong with you? Maybe like, can you not afford a car?Maybe things like that. It should be. Yeah. Everyone expects transportation by a car.
And also, like everybody had a car, and then later they meet a lot of some people would like expect which car do you have, like what type of car, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think like I remember my old like high school like history teacher, like she didn't ride a car at all. She just drove public transit.
Cool, good.
Yeah, but like whenever like people ask her like, hey, why don't you drive a car? Like, why don't you drive a car? Because that's normal. She said that she doesn't want to drive a car. Like there's this expectation that people should drive cars to get around.
Yeah.
and not rely on public transit because that's for the poor.
Yeah, exactly. And that generates that itself, those like cultural expectations kind of feed back into material conditions in an interesting way. I mean, that's the idea, isn't it? That the structure of power perpetuates by way of generating cultural expectations that then feed back in the material conditions. This is the basic like Marxist, base and superstructure model, but we've been refining it since he wrote. So like I call it something like material conditions and culture, whatever. Anyway, the part of the idea is that, or part of the theory here is that exactly when you create social expectations, when you create that superstructure, that culture, that helps to inform the material conditions that arise. Next, it helps to inform the evolution of those material conditions. So, for example, exactly when you set the expectation that everybody has a car and that if you don't have one, it means you can't afford one, and if you can't afford one, that means you're a worse person. What that means is that almost everybody will go out and get a car, or at least try to, and they will then be able to use that on the roads that have been generated by people having like the political will to build roads because they have and expect to have cars. So when public transportation arises in a city, when it does, I've spent a bunch of time in San Diego very recently. They don't have that, at least not in the suburbs where I lived. When that is the case, it is actually going to be the case that the people who ride public transit are overwhelmingly those who can't afford not to, who have to get around some way but can't afford to drive a car. Maybe people who are unhoused and like seeking shelter or trying to get somewhere without access to a map because they can't afford a phone either, et cetera, et cetera. So you wind up with that becoming true. You have a self-fulfilling prophecy made by the idea that you're poor if you ride public transportation, and you're normal if you drive a car. I would say as well, like it can really impact. For me, it's really impacted social stuff. Like if I want to go somewhere, or if I'm like invited somewhere, it's a huge consideration whether or not I'll be able to get there in a reasonable time and at reasonable ad hoc expense because I don't have access to a car. Or at least maybe I theoretically have access to one, but only by propping up, rideshare organizations, which are themselves almost comically evil,
Yeah, I guess for you, like you have to pre-plan a lot. Like, do I have enough time to be here at this specific time? I think I do.
Yeah, it's very difficult and like surprisingly expensive. Probably less expensive than having a car, but yes, genuinely surprisingly expensive. And that by itself is so weird, right? They're like offsetting cost in public transit by charging people stuff for it. But what that means is that it's less accessible. Anyway.
wait, there's one more thing. So disabled people get cheaper, like I guess like public transit, like the tickets. It's like 50% or 70% off, I think.
Students get it for free. But that's like local stuff. I mean like Amtrak.
Oh yeah, Amtrak.
Because if you really want to travel like between cities or a meaningful distance, especially in like Central California where we are,
I don't think there's any discounts for disabled people.
Not that I've been able to find, but boy, if I could.
Yeah. Does Amtrak accessible?
Is Amtrak accessible?
It's not the most accessible. Like there's this second floor that wheelchair people can't even get into. That
True.
like when I rode it to like Seattle, I had to stay in like one one car all throughout, and the bathroom wasn't even like wheelchair accessible. I don't know why. It was like so small.
Yeah, I suspect that I've seen stuff vary a little bit like from train to train, but you're exactly right. Like it's not universally designed. I think there's some ADA compliance going on as opposed to the idea of universal design. We've talked about that before as well. Like the ADA is sort of designed to fail in the very key ways that disadvantage disabled people. Again, cultural norms and expectations and stuff arising out of like naturally oppressive material conditions, or rather conditions that need to be oppressive in order to funnel more money to the top of the economy. So one of the key things I think for here is that as we walk through life, or as we roll through life, trying
Yeah.
like sort of implicitly holding ourselves to cultural expectations because they've been sort of fed into us by growing up in this culture. And I can speak about like the mechanism by which that happens educationally, but there isn't time. As we go through life with those expectations sort of embedded, there is a certain sense in which like cultural taxation takes effect, where people who can't meet the standard, or who feel lesser by way of that standard or whatever, wind up with not only a lot of extra time and energy having to be spent on things that able people don't struggle with, but also the weight of those expectations and of that continuous sort of failure to meet them can really weigh a person down. And part of the idea, I think, there is that we're being made functionally less able to collectivize by taking up lots of extra time and energy on stuff that able people don't struggle with. There's less time and energy left to like unionize and research in politics and like vote and things and things that doing intellectual moves that theoretically could begin to or do some work to like threaten the structure of power to which we're subject, and by making us feel lesser at the same time, and by really allowing us to feel lesser by way of these sort of emergent cultural expectations that have come about that we can't meet. They hurt our self-image, our ability to imagine ourselves as being like worthy of help from, say, the richest government in the world, which gets rich by furthering capital. Sorry. So yeah, I think this is part of the key observation that I think I have made, that I want to make, is that it is made difficult for disabled people to operate as individuals, and by way of their being, let's say, struggling more to operate and function as individuals, they're made to feel incapable of functioning as individuals who are part of a community or a collective. Mm-hmm. And that means that as individuals, they'll continue to be powerless to change the system that oppresses them.
Yeah, I want to talk about like the expectations like has changed, like with the word handicap. When you mentioned like the word handicap, like people would obviously think like, oh, they can't contribute to society. Oh, like how hard is your life? Things like that. But like it can change by like having example people. It's like people like me, or people like Will, or like people like you who are disabled can like show the younger generation that yes, you can still live a life of like luxury, live a life of peacefulness, of respect, things like that, by just like showing up as an example, even like on TV. Because like if you see a disabled person who's on TV, you kind of think like, oh, I can be an actor too. I don't have to not be an actor. I don't have to give up my dreams. It's like seeing someone else do what you want to do, and that inspires you to do what you want to do.
Yeah, I want to say even that we can change those dynamics. Those like the image of what it means to live a successful life is one of the things. Maybe it's synthetically the thing that these hegemonic ideals are all sort of pointing us toward, and they're defining living life as being a certain thing. They're defining contributing to society as being a certain kind of set of things in our heads. And well, that's not the case. I mean, obviously making money is not the same thing as contributing to society, and owning lots of stuff is not the same thing as living in comfort and living in peace. But we have to sort of, change people. I guess part of the idea here is that we can change people's idea of basically what it means to live successfully by way, I hope, of like examples. That's certainly where I've learned stuff. I'm not creative enough to have like good political imagination by myself. It has to be like people telling me so and people showing me that it's possible. So yeah, like people can have like exemplary cases. How exactly to do that, and what, like, can we expect people to go and do that? I don't know. maybe it's like there's probably something here to do with like social responsibility on that exact front. Maybe not. Maybe it's just not a reasonable thing. Anyway, that's all speculation for me. Like it's just that I think you're right. Like you can change the ideals by example, and I wonder as well if addressing the material conditions more directly would help significantly with that. I imagine it would. I'm kind of committed to that by way of like adopting the lens of historical materialism, right, where you change material conditions first and then culture arises out of it. So changing expectations probably is about changing material conditions. So if public policy could do that, then that could seriously like augment the I don't know, expectation or the cultural setting role that role models and examples play for people. If you have somebody who's like, showing that like living successfully or trying to show that living successfully doesn't necessarily mean having several cars, for example. Part of why that will be possible, or part of what would help with that, is if we had a municipal and like interstate infrastructure that didn't rely as much on car ownership, and if car manufacturers didn't have as much like political clout as they currently do. I don't know if we've ever even discussed that. But yeah, part of the idea here is as well is that material conditions make powerful individuals, but powerful individuals take control of politics. There you go.
Yeah, I had a question for Will Prime.
Yeah.
I guess like has your expectation of yourself has changed since since you moved to like America?
It's changed a lot in expectations about how I cannot go to school in my country.
Mhm.
They had a lot of expectations that you had to go to work hard and like go to study aside from different class and until all night, and that I cannot do in my country. That's a lot of work, and they expect a lot from students. But when I got here, it's much more easier. They give me more opportunity, which I just cut off that all the expectations. I just go with like normal people.
Yeah, I think
And
another aspect to it is like infrastructure. Like there's a lot more infrastructure for disabled
for
people.
the infrastructure, yeah, that's also the same thing too. It, the infrastructure there is so good for people like me to do education, but here, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like expectations can change based on like your tools, based on like like what society you live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me, like I always had the expectation that I will like go into like work. No one has said to me like, "Oh, you ain't gonna like contribute to anything to society. You ain't gonna have I guess you ain't gonna go to school, or like you not going to like work at all." Like I didn't have to like fight over that, but like there is this expectation that like like I guess the relatives don't ask like, "Oh, are you going to school?" Like because you're not like expecting me to go to school, but like no one's telling me to be like, "No, you shouldn't go to school." But
Well,
like,
all right.
yeah, does that make
And
sense?
I also have one expectation that why would you go to school from like too far away, like 10 miles away? It's kind of far. Why not go to school like the one next to your house? And I didn't like that. I just like to go fast day there. I just go fast day.
Yeah, it's
There you go.
like state is a college. I mean, it's a state college.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean that's just exactly the thing, isn't it? Like you can make the situation, you can change expectations, make the lived experience as well as the material conditions more accessible, less oppressive, or you can have more positive freedom in the situation by way of changing infrastructure. And the United States, for all of the shortcomings, has done a job of that. Like there is a significantly greater, as you point out, this is a significantly greater accessibility embedded in infrastructure projects here than in other places. I don't know, by the way, which country that is that you're talking about, William Prime.
It's Vietnam.
Yeah, Vietnam.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I'm not perfect, but like,
okay.
well, there's another thing too, is that the historical materialism goes all the way down. Is the issue. So if you have a nation like Vietnam, whose relatively recent, like 20th century history is just embroiled in colonialism and war,
Yeah.
and such,
Yep.
you are going to wind up with less wealth in that place. And this is any place. I think we could say something somewhat similar about a lot of continental Africa, and certain parts of many parts of Europe and Asia as well. You could say something similar, but there's just a lot, because there's less wealth there overall, less materials, because they've been extracted by I mean, literally the United States of America for the most part, colonial Britain before that. You have less wealth or less resources to allocate within the borders of the country, and so you get infrastructure that is less accessible, that really depends on people being like able-bodied and maybe even exceptionally so, in order to navigate ordinary life, because that infrastructure tends to be easier to build or to take less resources to build. And so you wind up with a significantly more like disabled, oppressive local culture by way of those exact material conditions, because suddenly like the expectations are greater on a practical side, and we come to think of the practical stuff as being the natural stuff, or the essential features of being a person. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like infrastructure.
It makes sense.
Yeah, infrastructure supports everyone. If there's not enough infrastructure for disabled people to go to school, then they're not going to go to school. If there's not enough infrastructure.
There you go.
Mhm.
And sorry, the framework of historical materialism is something I'm learning, and it connects everything.
Yeah,
so I go all the way to like, yeah, and therefore, war is bad. Like that's the reason. That's
War
the
is
entire
bad.
thing, because that's part of it. But no, sincerely, like that's there's these expectations. They change with material conditions, and we can change them again. I guess is the uplifting thing that can be said about all this, is that changing material conditions and trying to change culture in such a way that feeds back into material conditions in a positive way can make a meaningful impact. And we can see that partly through like the contrast between the United States with its history of disability advocacy and the ADA and for all its shortcomings and so on. Contrast that with like countries where there just happen to be fewer resources to allocate in the first place, maybe less in the way of like pro-democratic infrastructure and so forth. Because you can see like the contrast between the two sets of strictly cultural social norms.
Yeah, maybe less developed nations like don't have like any laws that talks about disability.
True. I mean, as far as I know, for sure, there's a lot in like prehistory that's straight up lost. But yeah, completely so. Like there wasn't, as far as I know, nearly as much sort of I don't know, like actively abusive rhetoric and cultural expectations about disabled people in like feudalist Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Because the general trend was that if you were like unable to work in the farm, well, you could still find something to do, and it would help like your household, because it was your household that was getting taxed by whichever landlord you happen to have before the following conquest. So you could have there was obviously like not a positive attitude towards disabled people, but like they had more social mobility or more clout in some ways. At least this is my reading of the history of it.
Yeah, I think some parts like they try to keep disabled people hidden, or like not really talked about. Don't go to like the get-togethers, the relative families.
Yeah, post-industrial revolution, and like I'm thinking like the 1890s or something. We have a long story in the United States of specifically in the United States, and like I want to say Western Europe, but I'm specifically thinking of like London,
Yeah.
of like so-called mental institutions or mental hospitals that were really just sequestering disabled people for indefinite periods of time. Because at that point we had all switched to capitalism. We had become, you know, the state of affairs in which everybody is expected to do like to offer surplus labor value to somebody, and disabled people found themselves less able to do that by way of, well, being disabled. That's what it means.
Yeah, and there's
And
no
so
like
they just got shamed and sequestered.
yeah, there are basically like no jobs for them at all, because like all the jobs are like kind of like work related or like physically labor related,
Yeah, for like, especially for like
like London,
mental
like
institutions. And I don't even want to. Do we even? There's no time, but I would love to like just at least just touch on like hysteria and the reason, or hysteria and the reasons like why that is the case. It's essentially like the only thing they would ever diagnose a mentally ill woman with back in the day. But that's not a non-entity. But
wait, I just had an idea.
time.
Like they kind of like, I guess like if women were like kind of like considered like lesbian, then they would just put them in a mental institution.
Oh my gosh.
William,
Sorry, go ahead.
Can you say what is hysteria?
Oh, sure. Okay, in modern parlance, hysteria is a way of saying like almost very excited and stressed about it, essentially. So
Okay.
if you're in hysterics and inconsolable, it means you're, you know, crying a lot or something like that. It's like fancy and illustrated now. It used to essentially just be if you were a woman with some kind of, you know, like mental illness or like a mental disability, etc.
Or maybe like, or maybe not even mental illness. You know? Like maybe just be like, oh, you're not like fitting into the norms. Oh, they don't want to marry, so let's give them like the term hysteria, and they can just be in the mental institution forever.
And again, like material conditions here, where you have women who are less useful for the marketplace, and so they get like ignored in medical science, because why would you bother? You're supposed to be working on people who are good for capital. And you wind up with the diagnosis of hysteria being such a broad broad category, and like a catch-all for the outs, for the odd ones out. And that's, yeah, basically you get these like abusive medical diagnoses, or, you know, medical practices out of material conditions that are themselves oppressive, or in which like women happen to be less useful, or perceived as being like designed for a different role, that of like, I don't know, mother and housewife, etc. Again, as material conditions change, however, and as like social forces, as like cultural shifts feed into and inform the change in material conditions, that gets better, not good, but better, because over time we have become less ashamed of disability, because we understand, not because most people understand it as a relation to capital, but because we have like culturally kind of shifted to in the direction of accepting bodies as they get built, as much as we can. And there's still a bit of a pejorative attitude. For example, like having a job is equated with contributing to society, whereas those two things are not the same, and so on and so forth. But it's all followed like a positive trajectory, at least for the most part, where people are more free, more liberated now than they have been in the past, exactly just because there has been, you know, change in material conditions. There have been example cases of success with those changes. There's been like cultural shift in the strictly like intellectual philosophical realm that follows from more access of everybody to get education, and so on and so forth. So it's like a hopeful story that we can tell.
Yeah.
But it's important to like keep in mind, again, hegemony generates these ideals to which we kind of implicitly hold ourselves or hold other people, and it's important to like relate those two things together, to deconstruct what we think is right and good and obvious, as much as we can, in order to to have a more liberating political praxis. And I hope people can this will be like one of many steps in that direction.
I just thought of like another example of how like infrastructure changed. I know for Sac State, like they didn't design like the campus for disabled people in mind, but they're like changing infrastructure, making sure there's ramps, making sure there's automatic doors, and that's like that's an example of how infrastructure can change.
Absolutely. And part of the drive for that is like literally individuals like us, but more so like the administrators who got brought on in a way that was not especially conducive to like capital, where like they get brought on into a program that's less than ideally able to actually meaningfully change infrastructure, but that is hoped to do so. Like the structure that of power right now is such that a lot of people get hired and start doing work that is totally like in good faith, that is like trying to be anti-racist, trying to be anti-ableist, and so forth. Whereas before, you probably wouldn't even have seen that. So like the vector has changed, and it is less effective now at oppressing people. So you get individuals lobbying the school for ramps and things and changes of infrastructure. And they're, you know, the committees doing that are less able to do it than I would like to see them do. But the shift is one in which like capital is compromising itself over time very slowly. And that's a positive trend. The work is not done, but you still see like changes of like the makeup of the student body and the faculty and staff and administration changing the infrastructure over time, and that will precipitate even greater levels of change. So okay, it could go on and on and on. As I said, many steps that are hopefully constructive and that will, you know, make us again more free. That's kind of what I want to emphasize as well, that you can be more free by way not of what you're theoretically allowed to do, but by way of what's actually like facilitated, what's actually sort of made possible by the infrastructure and economics that you have around you. So thanks everyone. Are there any any final comments, any tangents that we have yet to cover?
I just want to repeat one more thing. Expectations for disabled people can change over time, and they are changing. Like we can live like a successful life no matter like how we're disabled.
And I want to say expectations. Sometimes it can be good, but sometimes it's not good. And we, as a disabled people, we can change that.
And I hope that we can. And that's what to say. We gotta collectivize. We gotta do this like deconstruction. We gotta help each other out with it. And that's part of where I want to drive people in the direction of going. So thanks everybody. Thank you to my lovely esteemed colleagues. Not esteemed enough because of those cultural expectations, but there you go. And thank you to you, the viewer, listener, whatever, who cares. There's no visual component of this podcast. It doesn't need to be. And we will hopefully catch you next time. Are we sure about the topic for next meeting, by the way?
I think we're doing both topic next week. I don't know. Anyways, we'll see you guys later. Bye. Hashtag
hashtag we're good at podcasting. See you later. Bye.
See you later.
Good at podcasting.
You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a podcast that centers with the hopes of uplifting, informing, and bringing together disabled people and their allies. If you'd like to join Dana in the conversation, head to the description to check out our link tree and find us on Instagram at DANA at Sac State. Hashtag Where's the Ramp? Hashtag We're Good at Podcasting.